Welcome to the Method Podcast. I'm Aidan Simpson, and this is where we talk to designers at Google about work, life, and the future of design. Today's episode is with Jay Wong, one of the UX designers working on Project Fi, Google's wireless data and phone service. Jay and I talk about the design decisions behind Project Fi, working as a designer with a computer science degree, and much, much more. So enough from me. Hope you enjoy this episode of the Method Podcast.
Hi, my name's Jay. I've been on the Project Fi team since January this year, and I've been at Google for 4 years in total.
What drew you to working on Project Fi?
I was really drawn to Project Fi because up until that point, I'd worked on G Plus and Hangouts and Photos, and I think a lot of the objective of those apps are to kind of like keep you in the app and stay in the app, and a lot of the interaction is kind of just like it's contained to the app itself. But Project Fi is like a very interesting project because it's actually more service design rather than app design. Right. So you sort of have control. We have control over the entire life cycle, like the marketing website, the checkout process, the activation process, the packaging of the SIM cards and the phones when you get them. So
it's a larger design project with more depth and breadth.
Yeah, there's just like a lot of complexity. You're thinking about every endpoint, and it's much bigger than just like UX design from an app point of view.
And how has your process changed because of that?
I think you need to have a much wider view, like a bigger bird's eye view on like what's happening, and you need to kind of like make sure you're always checking in at different points, because like certain things don't match. Like you can't have complete consistency. If you think about like a UI where you always have the same like UI elements, it's not exactly the same because there are so many different ways of interacting with this service. And I think it's in those cases, because it's a service, you need to have a much more clearer idea of like, for example, the brand or the tone or your principles at a very high and more abstract level. Like we always want to be helpful, witty, confident. And I don't think that's as important when you're thinking about just like sort of an app, but when you're thinking about a service with much more different kinds of design in the process, it's very helpful to have like an overarching overall feeling that you want to give the user.
What is the hardest problem you think you're working on across all of that?
Oh, there are so many. I think that there's a lot of complexity. There are so many dimensions of like states, and also on Project Fi, there's also like lots of different users. So for example, we have like a group plan. And it's not just like how you use this app, but it's like you controlling everyone else and what they see and how you all interact with each other. There are like multiple flows that kind of require like multiple handshakes basically in order to get anything done. And that is really, really complex because you want your flows to be like very simple and fast, but ultimately there are some like necessary time stops. Like just to put it in perspective, we have a checkout process that's like 11 screens in total, but the set of designs for that are over 85 different screens. Okay. Because there can be like 85 different outcomes almost. It needs to seem so easy and so simple, and it does. Like when people use our product, like we get really good customer satisfaction, a lot of feedback saying it's very simple and very intuitive. But honestly, behind the scenes, it is so complex, like what's happening, the decisions that you're making affecting the UI. And sort of like the amount of thought that's gone into hiding all of those is like there's a lot of time that's gone into it.
When did you first realize you could be a designer?
Well, I'm pretty sure that I have like websites and blogs from when I'm like 12 or 11 where I'm just talking about how I want to quit school and become a website designer.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, they still exist online, never telling anyone the URL.
Okay. Did you have like a creative upbringing, or were your parents into liberal arts, creative arts?
Not at all. The real story is that I remember this so clearly. I was maybe like 7 or 8, and I went to like my friend's house, and she was older, and she was like, look, there's this really cool game called Neopets. And I was like, Neopets, what's that? And I wanted to like make all this money in my Neopet store, and I like had this Neopet guild. I wanted people to like join it, and realized that in order to do so, I needed my like store to stand out And in order to stand out, I needed to like learn all this HTML and CSS to like make it all look good. And then I kind of like very quickly realized that actually the part I liked most was not really like anything to do with the Neopets, but was just like making, like using code to like make these beautiful things. And I learned this completely on my own with no like help at all. And in fact, I remember not realizing, this is like a really stupid story, but like I would copy and paste the URL, like the address of like a local file locally into my code. And when I would look at it on my computer, like it would grab an image and it would look just fine. But then I would like go onto my brother's computer or go to my friend's house and be like, look at my website. And then I would just get the image error links for everything. And it took me like a while. I was like, 9 or something at the time to realize that actually like there's a completely different concept between like local addresses and actual uploaded images on the internet. So I kind of found my love of web design kind of from there and coding from there, and then sort of started making my own websites, my own blogs, my own templates, like forums and stuff, and then never looked back.
Okay, and that kind of led you into web design and design itself.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I started with web design first when I was super young and I loved technology, but then I kind of, as I got a bit older in high school, I was then more interested in like photography and film and graphic design. I wanted to like start a magazine and stuff. And then I kind of like looped all the way around. I went to design school for like a year and then was like, okay, I don't find print that compelling anymore. And I kind of really miss like coding, which is why I went back and then decided to like pick up a second degree. Like, so I basically decided to take a second major. So I was like I did a double degree in design and computer science. And yeah, so I kind of did both because it was weird because I always knew I wanted to like make apps or make websites, but like you go to computer science, like you go and study computer science and it's very technical and it's like all algorithm based and data structures, which I loved, but there isn't this like visceral feeling from like seeing something visually that you create. And then I felt like graphic design is so boring because it's so static and there's no like fluidity or like there's like much less problem solving.
I know what you mean. Like the first time I built a website and I could interact with the pages and change pages, I was done. I was so hooked after that point of view. Like actually, whereas all the print design I'd ever done when I was studying before, same feeling. It felt very flat.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like not as engaging. And when you really create something in code and you see it in real life, it's just like there's literally no other rush in the world of like that like creation aspect. And like it's just not the same. Like making a mock it's gonna get you so far and it's like nice to see, but it's just seeing it and interacting with something and like being and nutting out a really difficult design problem, like UX problem, is just so satisfying.
You integrate prototyping a lot into your process. What benefits have you found from that?
I think prototyping has like lots of different benefits. I think there are many interactions, especially in this day and age where there's like a lot of motion and a lot of feeling that you're trying to get that you literally can't capture in static images. And sometimes I also think it can be quicker to prototype than to like make 50 mocks of the same thing with slightly different bounds, if that makes sense.
Do you think that's because you have a background in coding, whereas if you didn't have the background in coding, it would still be quicker?
I mean, there's always always a toss-up because, of course, like there are some things you get for free with coding, which is like being able to change one property and change them all versus having to do that same thing. And there's a couple of things in Sketch like symbols that kind of help you get there, but it's definitely not as fluid as it is today, like with code still. But I mean, certainly, yes, I think prototyping is a lot easier for me because of my background and it comes more naturally to me and that's how I think. But I think even a designer who does not have that strong a coding experience, like learning to code at the very least, it forces you to get better as a designer because it's forcing you to think of everything as a system, right? Like every time you break a system, now it's a more conscious decision of like, yes, I think this needs to be different. Instead of like, I think sometimes if you just always approach it from just a visual design, you're much more likely to like bend your rules or like kind of do something that's a little inconsistent because it like looks a little better in this instance. When sometimes I think like that's not practical, that's not how it gets built. And yeah, it's helping kind of regulate your design to make sure it's like working consistently.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And at a company like Google, which is engineering driven, have you found that it's really helped you sell your ideas to other stakeholders in your team?
Absolutely. I honestly think that it's maybe one of the biggest like factors and biggest strengths that I've had at Google and helped me in my career. I'm very close with like every engineering team I've ever worked with. In my first year at Google, I was actually contributing code to the code base just because it was just easier for me to like submit polished changes than work with someone to do it. I've done that less now because as I've gotten older, I've realized I don't think it's as valuable, a valuable use of a designer's time because there's just so much with Google infrastructure that just becomes a pain to like keep track of. But having said that, like I regularly sit down and pair program with my engineers to like pair polish things. And I think that like my understanding of coding and my technical reasoning means that like one, my designs are always much more like real, like I'm thinking about feasibility as I design. But two, like I can kind of communicate with them and describe what I want. And actually, like often they'll be like, oh, I don't think this is possible. And then I'll actually just like write them like a code snippet that they'll use to do it. And I think that's because at Google, there's actually like, for better or worse, we don't hire like front-end engineers to be like front-end engineers. We don't hire them because they're great at building like visual things.
Yeah.
And so often like a lot of the team, like they'll be kind of back-end engineers or very technical engineers who have just been put on a team that happens to be implementing something, like scripting something. And so they might not know some of the like really cool CSS things that they can do and that I can help them with.
Yeah.
So
do you feel like it raises the level of trust within your team as well?
Yeah. Consistently, like throughout all the different teams I've worked with, like I've always gotten great feedback from my engineers saying that it's like a great skill. It's a great like they are much more willing to trust my design decision because they know that I've thought about like how much extra work, what it is I'm asking of them is, and I've decided that this is worth it. Mm-hmm. Compared to say maybe like a designer who may be less technical and everything they show is a little bit more blue sky, and now it's hard for them to like identify like what's worth it, if that makes sense.
Changing topic a little bit, you recently gave a talk at UXU on designer tools. What drove you to want to give that talk?
So firstly, I love to teach. I like taught in high school. I taught in university. I teach part-time at GA.
Let's dig into that a little bit more. Like, why do you love to teach?
I love teaching because there's like, well, first, I guess earlier this conversation, I said that there's nothing greater in this world than like writing code and seeing it. But I guess either an equal or like very close second feeling is like working with someone and at the beginning of time with them, they can't do something, and then seeing them be able to do something when they walk out of the room. Yeah. So like even something as simple as I teach like a 9-hour, like an 8-hour introduction to coding to non-engineers at Google. And at the beginning of the day, they like often don't even know how the internet works. And by the end of the day, like I will fully build and design like a resume with them, and they'll actually like publish it to like the web, to the internet, and like have a URL they can show people.
Very cool.
And I guess it's in a way, it's almost me trying to share that joy of creation with more people and show them that it's like, it's not that hard. Like you can do it too if you want to. Yeah. So that's like one reason is I love teaching for that reason fundamentally, but also because like I'm a designer, but I'm also like an engineer at heart, and like efficiency is my favorite like thing. I cannot stand watching like, it's really hard for me to watch another designer like work if they're like being really slow and being really inefficient, because I just want to be like, why aren't you using shortcuts? Why aren't you doing these things? Like, why are you wasting your time like redlining for like days when you could just use something else and it'll just do it for you? Like, I like that's why I taught the class, is because I just think that the faster you are at the tool and like the quicker you are doing things that are like boring, the more time you can spend thinking about like real design problems and actually innovating and solving like the things that the computer can't solve.
So you teach at General Assembly, and like, are there any other classes that you've taught that you've got real value from?
So I teach General Assembly. I teach Google Computer Science Summer Institute, which is a computer science program for rising, like basically seniors that have just graduated going into computer science from underrepresented backgrounds. So like racial minorities and gender minorities and low socioeconomic backgrounds. I love teaching that because, one, it really means a lot to them. It's really awesome to see people at that age also grow in learning the first time and feeling empowered. And I also learn a lot from them as well about like what their lives are like and what their perspectives are like. Mm-hmm. So I think it's like very much a two-way street. And I think, I often think to myself how lucky it was that I just by some random chance like fell into this Neopets thing, and how much of an impact it had on my life. But I literally had nobody to show me that, and it's just almost a coincidence. Like if I hadn't met that person, maybe I would be doing something completely different that I wouldn't enjoy.
The little bit of teaching that I've done, it bolsters your confidence a little bit when you can realize you can teach somebody something, and from start to finish like you do.
Absolutely. I like stand by the fact that teaching has only made me like a lot better, because I think there are skills you have innately and you just learn to do them, but forcing yourself to re-explain it to someone else, it almost forces you to think about it more concretely and know how to talk about it. And like the act of explaining to someone else makes you actually internalize it and give logic and reason to like maybe something that was a little bit more soft or like innate originally. Yeah. And I think that's the true test. Like that's basically what I did through university. I would teach like a lot of the university classes I was doing. I like taught HCI at university, and like teaching university students is kind of what forced me to be like, okay, make sure I got to actually know what I'm doing right now, what I'm talking about, because they're like university results kind of depend on it.
Are there any classes that you wish were offered at Google in the Grow kind of format?
Yeah, I wish that like efficiency, like tool efficiency was taught a little bit more. Like I think Sketch like that class does not exist. I made it for UXU. So I wish like that was being taught more. I wish that maybe we had a few more. Actually, this is not exactly relevant.
Go for it.
Well, I just think that Google has so many tools that they've built for engineers to like make the engineering process better and more efficient. And the same has not happened for designers. Yeah. So designers are still like spending a lot of time on things that are like not valuable, like.
Can you give an example?
But necessary. I mean, red lines is like the biggest number one thing, or even things like we don't have consistency in how we like build our files. Each team probably has their own system, but like I'm pretty proud because I think my team actually like our files are really clean and like they're very well made, and it's really easy to like jump in and like they're like puzzle pieces, because I try to set a very like strict kind of like, not strict, that sounds limiting, but I'm pretty careful about making sure we have like bounding boxes on things, and I'm componentizing symbols, and that it's modular the way that an engineer would build an app to be modular. But sometimes like a lot of the time I think that like designers who don't have that discipline in their team, it means that like maybe it's quicker at the very beginning, but you don't get because you didn't put time at the very beginning to like make things neat. At the end of the day, like it becomes like exponentially harder to redline something that hasn't been organized properly. Yeah. Or to duplicate and like create screens that are kind of like offshoots or like the same screen but with a different scenario. It becomes like a lot harder because it's not neat and it's not like well put together. Yeah. So I think more teaching about like process and optimizing like design
Being efficient with the tools.
Yeah, being efficient with the tools.
I'm going to ask you a few questions just to like wrap it up a little bit. What are you most excited about going forward?
I mean, I guess because I'm in design mode, so I'm just like thinking about design stuff. But I'm like, as I said, I'm most excited about like seeing where like the tools go and seeing how that like merges and forms together to get more like, as I said, unify like the way that engineers think and the way the designers think. I'm also really excited about, this is kind of exciting and scary, but like at the same time, which is like, what is the role of a UX designer going to be in like 5 years or like 10 years? Because it's changed. It changes so fast and in a way it's like such a new profession, but at the same time, like technology moves and changes so fast that like, who knows if it's still going to be as relevant anymore. But I think like there's always going to be room for like problem solving the layer of how humans interact with technology, but it might just be different. Like I'm curious to see how VR takes off and like how a UX designer, like what are the new UX paradigms for like virtual reality? Yeah. And I think we're like still very far away from that being like super relevant right now. Yeah. But that's not to say that
it's not far off though.
It's not, yeah, it's like, it's not that far off. And there are so many established paradigms for like the screen that it's almost like, it's not easy anymore. Like that's definitely like not the right word, but it is a lot more like directed in a way. Like there's a lot you can kind of pull from and inspire, like you can get inspiration from. But as we shift to this like VR thing, it's going to be completely different. Like, and it's almost going to be a land grab. Like the way that when the iPhone came out, it was such an exciting time for UX design because there was like a land grab for like designing cool interactions. And I remember like even Apple would like there were like the famous cool design, like well-designed apps. And even Apple would like take the interactions that were coming up in cool apps and put it into their own like operating system, like Twitter's like swipe down to refresh. Like it's kind of amazing to have like designed that pattern and seeing that in like so many other places. And I think that's going to happen again for VR. And not just VR, but like as we move to more like external screens and not just like TV OSs, but like
multiple touch
screens that are like that can be used by multiple people at the same time. Like that kind of stuff. Like there's so many interesting ways that as we move into the future and like those screens become more prolific, like new patterns again for that.
I think that's a good place to leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Alrighty, just a final word from us at Google Design. Did you know you can sign up for Google Design's quarterly newsletter covering the latest and greatest design stories from Google and beyond? All you have to do is go to design.google.com/newsletter, put in your details and receive all this goodness straight into your inbox. One of my favorite parts is actually the 5 things to love right now section. This is a curated list of cool things chosen by people at Google, and I always learn something new. All right, that's it from us.